Welcome, everyone, to this special edition of Maine and Mulberry. Typically, you have Annabelle with you, but I am joining today as we move into a holiday weekend, and I have a very special guest with us, Shamichael Hallman. And Shamichael has just written an article for the Tool Carnival magazine that I read, and it really prompted me to start to have this conversation. And welcome, Shamichael. How are you today?
Man, I am great, Keith. Thanks so much for having me and to be a part of this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And so tell our viewers, our listeners a little bit. I know that you are the Carnival campus pastor for New Direction Christian Church, but that church is bigger. It's been around longer than what's in Carville. And just tell us a little bit about the church and what you do there.
Yeah, so the church has a really rich history. Actually started a few days after 9/11. The main campus is currently situated in the Hickory Hill community on the intersection of Ridgeway and Winchester. And so it's been there and done some really great work. The Carville location is a little newer. So it came in right around 07, 08. And so we've had the pleasure of doing some really great ministry there. I serve as the campus pastor there. So essentially, we are a multi-site operation. So our senior pastor, Dr. Stacey Spencer, does most of the preaching. And then I kind of fill in from there, doing some preaching every now and then, really kind of focusing on the community as a whole, right? So thinking about our overall church health, things such as congregational care and checking in on people, our members, and then kind of really being a voice for the Carville community. We do a lot of really interesting, outreach initiatives. We do a backpack drive each year with Central Church. And it's going to go over the last 10 years. So we've probably given out close to 9,000 backpacks. We do a lot of mentoring in the schools and things of that nature.
Okay, that's great. I know everything's kind of different right now with the school system, and that's for sure. And I guess there's a new normal for churching, I guess. And saying that you guys have two campuses and one head pastor that does a lot of the preaching, does the Carville campus, are you, if you were to attend the church, are you going to see someone live there preaching, or is it going to be across a screen from the other church?
Yeah, he's live. So, the benefit of being, it's really about a, say 22, 23 minute drive between the campus. And so the way our services are structured, he's able to be present and preach at all the services. And even when I'm, preaching, he's still actually there. But yeah, like you said, COVID has certainly pushed us really to be exclusively online.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an asset for sure. And so, but right now with COVID, have you guys opened back up at all for anyone in the church, or are you still just doing the remote?
Yeah, we have not opened yet. We actually we've been having conversations about what it might look like for us to go back. We've actually got a conversation scheduled for tomorrow where I feel like we'll probably start seriously thinking about what that looks like, maybe sometime in August for us, depending on, what's happening with the positivity rates and things of that nature. The good thing for us is that, we have really always been online. Even at kind of the launch of the kind of mother location, we've always had a kind of a younger audience. And so that's forced the church, to think about the different platforms to reach people. And so, we've been doing, services on Facebook for the last 11 years. And so, this is not, like COVID really hasn't interrupted that. We were able to pretty seamlessly move to completely online. But it certainly has changed, the way in which, we engage with each other and the way in which we fellowship with each other.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's good that and a lot of churches are catching up because they weren't doing the streaming, but some of the churches that have, like you say, a younger demographic, they're doing it already. So it's just a matter of, driving people, hoping you get your attendance up and those type things. But let's move a little bit into current events. And I know that was some of the things, like I say, you had written an article for the Tour Carnival magazine, and a lot of things were going on in Carnival. There's, of course, all the things that are happening with COVID and the shutdown, and that's creating a lot of, frustration, I guess, with people trying to get out and not being able to. It's kind of dragging on, and so it's starting to get a little bit tense around that. And then, of course, we've had the racial tension, which is one of the things that you keyed in on a little bit in the article. And one of the things I think that you said that really struck me in the article is that I think that we need to start having conversations. And I'm paraphrasing what you're saying. You can clarify, but you're saying we need to start having some conversations. And you had written about that a little bit. So maybe tell me a little bit about what the church and what New Direction is doing in the community, and how you're kind of handling some of that from a church standpoint, from an organization standpoint. How are you guys doing anything? How are you handling that?
Yeah, so I think, with COVID, very early on, we were seeing, and the news was telling us how, it was disproportionately affecting Black people, with these kind of comorbidities and things of that nature, just kind of overall issues with the healthcare system. And so, pretty quickly, and then of course, we were seeing, because of, phase one, stay-at-home orders and those sorts of things, kind of the immediate hit that many in our congregation were taking, not able to work and so on and so forth. And so, there have been a kind of a number of things that we've had to do to respond to that.
Sure.
And of course, we're always looking for ways to meet various needs. And so, like, for instance, right now we are having a weekly food distribution on the parking lot of our campus in Memphis, so that people can come and grab food. We've also served as a testing site. We think it's very important to help people get testing, particularly free testing, as often as possible. We're always wanting to encourage members to do those things. And then, of course, they're just normal things that we do that we're now trying to figure out how we pivot. Like I mentioned, in Carterville, we do this really big backpack drive, which we know is crucial and important for people, not only in Carterville, particularly in South Carterville, but we've seen people come from all from Marshall County and Fayette County, even in Memphis, who come and get the backpacks. And so even now we're trying to think about, well, how do we do that? How do we pivot and do those sorts of things this go around? Because we generally try to do that right before school kicks off. And so we're still kind of trying to talk through the logistics of what that looks like, and how do we support even the students who, when the school year starts back, who may be just opting to study from home, right, and not go back into the classroom. We know that many of those students, there's a great digital divide, both in Memphis, but also, there are a number of families in Carterville who don't have access to high-speed internet. And so we're also thinking about, how do we supplement some of those current backpack distribution to maybe, include hotspots or some sort of access to technology. And then, of course, on the George Floyd and the social justice kind of movement that we find ourselves in, this is not really, new for us. As I say us, the Black church. These are ongoing sermons and ongoing conversations, right? It's not just because of this particular moment in time. I think I go all the way back to, Trayvon Martin in 2012, or even before that. We always find ourselves in this place where we're having to think about matters of justice and equity. But in terms of what you said in terms of the article, I think it really is a really great time, specifically for us in Carterville, to start having conversations. There was just a beautiful moment that many of us were a part of a couple of weeks ago, when we had this wonderful march where we left from the town square, went down Poplar and came back. And I think there were, I wish there had been more, but it certainly warmed my heart to see the number of people who were there, and then kind of the cross section of people that were there, the race and age. And there were a number of, people who had handmade signs about, Black Lives Matter and justice and those sorts of things, Breonna Taylor. And I think, now what I hope is that particular moment in time would now provide opportunities for us to talk about what that actually means, and even how we might contextualize that for living in Carterville.
Thanks. Yeah, and you said a lot there, and I just quickly to drill down on one thing on the that you said on the COVID. Are both of your so our listeners are both of your churches testing sites, or is it the one in Memphis and or just one?
One in Memphis is a testing site right now.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that for our listeners.
Sure,
So
sure.
if you get tested, yeah. And so so there was the march, and I know that. It ended up being peacefully. There was some a little bit of worry on the front end there because of how it originated, but ended up being a peaceful march. And yeah, so in regards to that march that you're talking to, what is the response that we're looking for? I know that everyone's going out, and I know that there's a display and there's a peaceful display, and it's a protest technically. What would you like the community to do in a response to that? What are we trying to achieve? What are you guys trying to achieve with those type of things?
Well, I think one of the beautiful things is that march was really organized by younger generation, and so I think in many ways the younger generation is kind of moving us ahead. I think for us, and I think particularly what I wanted to convey in the article was for us to think about, if that statement, Black Lives Matter, if that statement is if that is true, and we truly believe that, and we truly understand that, then I think we need to start having conversations about how do we uplift that, right? So that it's not just a statement that we're making, but it's actually something that we're living out. And I think there are a number of ways to do that. The first way is just really to educate, right? I think I hear, and so my full-time job is a library. I manage a library in downtown Memphis, and just kind of seeing the number of individuals who are looking for resources to educate themselves about racism, about social justice and equity, right? And so I think for individuals who may not understand, these things, I think there are a number of books and really great resources to read, and really phenomenal authors, whether we're talking about James Baldwin or Angela Davis or Toni Morrison. There's really great people of color and Black people who have written really great pieces. But even beyond that, I mean, I think probably one of the most requested books right now in the Memphis Public Library is a book called White Fragility, which really is written by a white person to white people, which is and we cannot keep that book in rotation right now. And so I think it kind of starts just with education, right? So that we're kind of speaking from the same language, but then to kind of think about specifically what's happening in our community, and how we might think about things. But, Keith, as we talk about how do we contextualize Black Lives Matter, I think one good place to look at is in education, right? And to think about particularly, say, disciplinary actions. There is documented data from schools across our country that show that even when Black students are in the minority from a population standpoint, they're there in the majority from a disciplinary standpoint. And so for us to maybe have conversations around why is that, right? And what sort of policies could we get at? What sort of maybe anti-racist policies could we get at to address that, right? I mean, I think those are conversations that we need to have. For instance, when we have school systems that have, say, 40% Black, but they are the 65% of the discipline is, Black students, and there's some discrepancies there. So for us to think about the ways in which our education system may not be equal, to think about the ways in which even say white flight, it creates disproportionate situations around education, right? So I think this moment, what I hope would happen, and I think would be great for a number of us to come together and start saying, okay, well, what does this look like for us? And then how do we how do we have these conversations in a way where we're able to move things forward, right? Because the marching is great and the awareness is great, but in the end, we're trying to change structures. We're trying to change systems. We're trying to change policies that don't necessarily deal with everyone in an equal fashion.
Okay. So I'm with you on the first part, the education. So one of the things that, if I'm hearing what you're saying, is that these marches, the peaceful marches anyway, and the peaceful protesters, you're looking to kind of prompt some action to say, hey, maybe I don't know, I'm seeing what's happening out there. Maybe I don't know the full, but I see that this is a movement, and I see that these people are passionate about it enough that they're going to march. Maybe I need to look into it. And a good place to start is educating yourself on reading some books, things like that. And you threw out some names and that to get more understanding of what the core issues are, if you may not know. And then second, I think probably there's some of our people in the education system that might disagree with some of the statements that you're making. I don't know. I don't want to speak.
Oh, sure.
But, yeah. I don't know. But I think what you're saying more than a specific issue is there might be some things going on that once you start looking into this, that you see there's some injustices and that your eyes might get open to some things. Is that at that level? Is that's some of what is that?
Yeah, I think right? So. And I think, one of the things that I put in the article is that these are uncomfortable conversations. I tend to actually view them as courageous conversations. And I think where I often see hesitation, particularly from my white brothers and sisters, is in thinking that these moments are calling you racist. And that's not what we're saying. I'm not calling you racist. I'm saying that we live in a society that has socialized us to hold certain beliefs and certain patterns. And some of those patterns are racist, right? And so it's to begin to think about, like, I do believe, Keith, and I do hope that I don't offend your audience here. I do believe that racism permeates almost every system that we interact with. COVID made very clear that there were disparities in our healthcare system. But I believe we could drill that down and look at other areas. That we could look at employment, we could look at housing, we could look at education, we could look at prison and policing. There's so many things in which systems are not set up in an equitable and just way, right? And we talked in the very beginning about how our church is adjusting, right, and how our church is doing it. And I'll say again, like, many Black churches don't have the benefit of only talking, and I'm not saying that other churches don't. I know there are many churches of all faiths and all colors that have a social justice lens, but the Black church can never, like these things are always in front of us. We're always thinking, we're always having to have conversations around justice. We're always having to have conversations around issues of brutality. We're always having to have conversations around inequities in our communities, right? So like the content of our sermons and the things that we're studying, those things haven't changed just because of this particular news cycle. What I'm hoping happens in this moment, and I use this analogy in another call, Keith, is, you see, I've got these glasses on, and I've had these glasses. I've been wearing glasses since I was in the third grade, and I remember very clearly when I got the glasses. So in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, I was always sitting at the front of the class. And so I could see the board very clearly. In third grade, for some reason, I was shifted to the back of the class. And I realized that I could not see the board. Furthermore, I realized that everybody around me who was sitting back with me could see the board. And so I go to my teacher. I said, teacher, I can't see the board. And she writes this letter up, and I take it home, and my parents take me to the eyeglass the doctor optometrist, and I get the eye exam, we get glasses, and then I remember the day that I went back to school and I had the glasses, and I was sitting in the back, and I said, "Oh my God, I had no idea that everybody else could see like this." It didn't occur to me, right? And so, what I'm hoping is that this moment is serving as that for many of our brothers and sisters. That this moment is providing a set of lens through which we can see something that other people have been seeing for a very, very long time. And that in seeing that, we can begin to have conversations, not just for the sake of having conversations, but for the sake of saying, okay, well, how might we change some of these things, right? How might we deal with some of the evils of our society, right? I mean, like in these moments, we often lift up people like Dr. King, and we go to a particular 1963, I Have a Dream message, and we forget about all the other things that Dr. King wrote. One of his most powerful speeches was on the three evils of society, and one of those was racism. And you go back and read that speech, and even though it was delivered in 67, many of those things we still find ourselves facing today.
Okay. And I like your analogy. I think it applies across a lot of things, and would get your eyes open to certain things, and then you can start to drill down on those things, and starting with a conversation. And so I think that just trying to figure out the path. So if there's something that that we can do literally, it's try to start these conversations and try to look at things through a different lens. That's what you're saying. So if you were giving me advice as a person that lives in Carterville, and given what's happening right now, your advice to me would be start trying to educate yourself a little bit. I want you to educate yourself. I want you to see things through a lens that maybe you've looked through for a long time, but you think that maybe I don't see. And then we can start to have some conversations from a different place than where we are now. And that's kind of what I'm hearing. And I think I want to ask too, just to kind of shift a little bit, because that conversation seems to me, and I know that I hope that you'll appreciate this as a pastor, but that is a very similar conversation to what a church is talking as well. When you start to look at the world through a different lens. Once you become a Christian or you're saved, whatever terminology that you want to use, you start to look through, you look at the whole world differently, and through a different lens. And so just tell me a little bit about what role you think that plays, the faith aspect.
Yeah, I mean, the faith role is crucial, right? The faith role is crucial there. And I do appreciate, the way that you just phrased it. I think that's very much what we're looking for. We're looking for those conversations to start happening, right? And for people to hopefully see things differently. But then also, I think, and I'll add on to that, Keith, I had this really interesting conversation about 3 weeks ago, and it was a conversation that was convened by a different organization out of Seattle, that was trying to kind of have some of these sorts of conversations, and there was a breakout period, right, via Zoom, and you're supposed to have in your breakout session about 4 or 5. But in my breakout session, there was only one other person. And it was an older white lady. She was in her 70s. And she began to talk to me about her journey and about how her family had a very specific belief about people that were not like them. And she recognized at a very young age that the thought and the belief that her family had was wrong. And she called them out on that, and was almost immediately made a black sheep. But that did not deter her. And so she talked about kind of the last 55 years of her life and what she's trying to do. And she says that, hey, I recognize that as a white lady in America, there's a certain amount of privilege and power that I have. And she talked about kind of this 3-step ladder of things that she does. Like she said, really the only thing that she's really focused on right now is just trying to have conversations with other white women who were kind of like her parents, like how her family was, right? And she says that at this first ladder, she's asking people, as we already talked about, she's asking people just kind of educate themselves, right? So she's giving them books to read and essays to read and podcasts to listen to, right? And then at the second level, she's asking them to then make some sort of commitment, right? Because like this is going to cost you something. So she's asking for them to say donate financially to an organization, NAACP, some organization that's doing some work in an area that they're passionate about. And then at this third level, she's asking them to then go and kind of use that power, use that privilege to bring in other people who are where they used to be in terms of their thought pattern, right? And I think that's so powerful. In terms of the faith conversation, there's so many scriptures that speak to us about taking care of those who is my neighbor, right? Of feeding those who are hungry, of clothing those who are naked, of being the hands and feet of Christ, right? And that's very, very important work. But we also find throughout Scripture, Old and New Testament, this notion that we are to seek justice, that we are to deal with and dismantle systems of oppression. Like that's very much in Scripture, just as much as the other stuff. And so what I often, as I'm having conversations with other churches, I'd say there are really kind of 3 things that we need to do. That first thing is relief, like meet people's immediate needs, right? There are a lot of hurting people in our communities, people who need food, who need clothes, who need shelter, who need to get out of an abusive relationship, right? I mean, there are these very tangible needs. And so we have to do that relief work. But on top of that, we must then do some resource work, right? That we want to begin to equip people so that they can live lives where they're not dependent upon always looking for that handout. We want to both do the handout and a hand up. That we can't do, that you need both of them. So you have to do relief work, you have to do resource work, but at the very top, you have to do reform work. And reform work is looking at and saying, hey, there are the way that the systems that we interact with don't treat everyone equally, right? The conversation that I told you about the school system, that's not a fun conversation to have, right? And again, I don't say that, and I don't throw that out there, which I mean, and that is, we can go to actual data that's put out and look at that, but I don't throw that out to point a finger or to make someone feel bad. I say that because I know what it's like to be a Black student in a majority white system. There's a lot that comes through that, and so even then, I'm asking you to put on the lens of what that's like, right? And so this is more so. This is not less so pointing a finger at people and saying, "Hey, you're not doing a good job." More so, putting a finger on and spotlighting these students and say, "Hey, they're just as valuable as the white students. They're just as valuable as the Asian students. They're just as valuable, right? Let's make sure that we don't have any implicit bias or policy in place that might be harming them when we really want to educate. We want all these students to do well. I know every educator wants to see that, but then we have to think about what are the policies and structures that are in place that might be preventing
that. Okay. So yeah, I think I see what you're saying. And there's a couple of three steps there. And I think that is, I like the practical aspect of it. The woman you were speaking to in the breakout, how she's doing something as an individual, and this is how she's decided to do something, is I'm seeing things through a different lens, and I'm going to start to communicate that with other people I'm going to send them materials, things like that. And then at the end, I'm going to say, hey, if you start to see things through a different lens, I'm going to ask you to communicate that as well. From a very practical standpoint, that's something that myself, I think that when I hear things that are larger, me as an individual, it's hard for me to figure out how to really affect that change in any immediate way, because I think, okay, we need to reform these systems, or we need to recognize that there's something systematic going on. Well, it's hard for me to as an individual to say, okay, well, I don't know where to go with that. That's something that, I need to consider, and it gets a bigger conversation, about elected officials and, all that type of stuff. But
Sure.
what I can do, is I can try to educate myself and then start to spread that and move that on. So I think that's very practical advice. I think that that resonates a little bit. I know we've probably gone over your time a little bit. I appreciate you being with us today. I appreciate all the things that you've shared with our listeners, and I'll hope to see you around. You live in Collierville, right? Now you're so.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in Collierville for a little over a decade now, man, and I say it's a great city. I do appreciate all of the ways in which I've been able to interact with different churches and different houses of faith. I said we have come together over the past years to do a lot of great relief work. Together we have fed people, we have clothed people, we have provided resources for people. And I think this moment we now begin to ask ourselves, what's the next step, right? Do we continue to do those things, which we should, or do we now start looking at the reasons why some of these things exist and also tackling those? And I think in doing that, we fulfill the call of Christ, and we show ourselves to be the hands and feet of Christ. And so, Keith, I really do appreciate you providing me this platform.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I appreciate those final words from you, and appreciate the message, and hope you have a great day. Appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you so much, Keith. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Well, that wraps up this episode of Maine and Mulberry. You can see more episodes at maineandmulberry.com. And until next time, I'm Keith.
This episode of Maine and Mulberry is sponsored by Tour Collierville magazine. If you like Maine and Mulberry, you're going to love this hyperlocal lifestyle publication in Collierville, Tennessee. Check out local content at www.tourcollierville.com or by downloading the Tour Collierville app in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.